Hello and welcome to Suzi's Book Bag, hosted by me, Suzi Fay. It's not really a tote bag today, it's a plastic bag, but very appropriate to what we'll be talking about. This is a bag from Watkins Bookshop in London, just off the Charing Cross Road. A very famous occult bookshop. I feel sure that my guest is familiar with it. W.B. Yeats used to shop there for all his magical requirements. So it's a pretty famous place and a fascinating shop to drop into. Bookshop, magical shop, all things tarot card and divinatory can be found there. And that's what we're going to talk about today. My guest is Clare Pollard, the poet, now turned novelist. So we'll be talking about both aspects of her writing life. She's been described as a wunderkind. Her first book, The Heavy Petting Zoo, first book of poems, was written, I believe, when she was still at school in Bolton. We'll find out all about that, I'm sure. But let us welcome to the book bag, Clare Pollard. Hi, Clare.
Hi, Suzi. Thanks for having me.
Is that true? Did you start writing?
It's nice to still be a wunderkind at 45.
Well, poets
I
are.
was the Britney Spears of poetry for a while.
Of course you were. Of course you were. How did that come about? Because that is pretty extraordinary to have a book published so young.
Yeah, I didn't realise how extraordinary it was. I think I was competing with Mary Shelley. I think that was it.
Oh God, yeah. What, Frankenstein at 18?
Yeah. Also, the woman who wrote the Garden Gang books, the child who wrote the Garden Gang books, what was she called? Jane Fisher, who had them published with Ladybird when she was 9 years old. And I remember reading those when I was 9, and I was so jealous. So, after that, I was always slightly behind in the race.
Yeah, you were playing catch up already at the age of 9. So I think that's the thing about it. If you don't know that something's hard, you do it anyway. There aren't any obstacles in your way.
Magazines. Yeah, I sent stuff off to magazines. My mum used to write plays in the village for like the WI and the village pantomime. And someone had bought her their artists and writers yearbook. So this was like pre-internet. And I just started sending poems to magazines listed in that, which was kind of a bit geeky of me, I suppose. I was off with my little essays every week to the post office. And I got a couple published in magazines, and then Neil, my editor, spotted my poem, The Heavy Petting Zoo, in the Rialto, and wrote to me. And that was how it began. But he said, have you got a collection? And I said yes, and I hadn't got one. And I sort of knocked half the collection off in about 2 weeks.
That's always the answer, isn't it? Have you finished your novel? Yes, of course I have.
Yeah.
I know so many writers who've done that.
I know. Funny story now looking back, because most people spend years getting their first collection published.
Yeah. Well, I was just talking to Tristram Fane Saunders, who had something similar with Michael Schmidt at Carcanet, and Michael Schmidt badgered him for 2 years. So, yeah, it's nice to be wanted, put it that way.
It is nice.
But I believe you've always wanted to write novels. Maybe it's the Mary Shelley thing again. Was that also in your mind when your
I wanted to write novels far before I wanted to write poetry. Really, poetry was a teenage thing, as it is for a lot of people. But I always wanted to be a writer since I can remember. And I wrote my first novel when I was in reception. I say novel, but book with chapters, chapter book. And the chapters were only about 3 sentences long, but I thought that was a novel.
Do you still have it?
Yeah, I've still got quite a few of my childhood novels actually at my mum's. So I've always loved storytelling, and I've always read lots and lots of novels.
To go back to my beautifully presented plastic bag, are you familiar with Watkins Bookshop?
I've only been there once, but it is an amazing shop. But I don't hang out there.
Well, I think it might be a little bit strange to hang out there, but a visit is a must. Because we are going to be talking about your debut novel, Delphi. Another thing that you're very keen on, and have always been keen on, is the Greek myths. So eventually this brought forth fruit, shall we say, in the form of this debut novel, which came out. Did it come out last? 2022. So I've got the proof copy here, and there's a lot about divination in it. So can you explain about Delphi? Delphi, the place, first of all.
Oh, Delphi, the place, first of all. I've never been, but I'm going this summer.
Oh, you never got to go?
No, I've just booked. I've just literally just booked it on booking.com this week. So I'm very excited. I'm finally going. I've always been interested in, well, it's two threads really. I've always been interested in Greek myth, and I've always been interested in the idea of prophecy. And prophecy, it's because of my father really. When I was growing up, and I write a lot about him in my non-fiction book, Fierce Bad Rabbits. When I was growing up, my dad claimed to be a psychic, and he met my mum and said, that's the woman I'm going to marry, and there's all these sorts of stories. He always said things like, oh, I'm not going out in the car today and on an icy night, and then the next day the engine went, and all these sorts of things. He was very good at betting on the horses. But I don't know. I don't know whether I truly believe he's psychic or not. He was quite an intuitive man. But I sort of believe it and don't believe it. And so I've always been fascinated by psychics and by the language they use, the way they manipulate language actually to make people believe that they're talking to their dead brother or whatever. But also a little bit of me does believe it's true as well. Fate. When I see a magpie, I have to say, "Good day to you, sir. Good day to you, sir."
Really? Oh, I haven't come across. I haven't come across that one, but I came across it. Is it one for sorrow, two for joy? And I heard that was actually because they mate for life. So if you see a single one, it means it's a kind of bereaved magpie. So there's something.
Yeah, well, the idea is that they are always in pairs. So if you see one, you say, "Good day to you, sir. Good day to you, sir." Like you're acknowledging there's two there. Really, I know there's two there. And then it sort of cancels out the sorrow. I think that's the idea.
Well, the right way of doing things, or I suppose the way you intended to do it, was to go to Delphi and then write Delphi, the novel. But something kind of got in the way of that.
Yes, so I was sort of researching generally oracles and prophecy. I thought maybe it would be another non-fiction book after Fierce Bad Rabbits. I thought maybe it would be a book of poetry. I just knew it was interesting and something I wanted to dig into. I've always been fascinated by Cassandra. She's someone I come back to a lot. And I was really interested in this figure, particularly of the Delphic oracle, the oracle at Delphi, who's so interesting. I keep coming back to her. I think it's funny I've come back to her now because she was often a middle-aged woman, quite an ordinary middle-aged woman who would then be expected to sort of give up her family and children or whatever and come to Delphi. And it's hard to know if she was the most powerful woman in the world or completely powerless, like an instrument. And I think that ambiguity is so interesting to me because Apollo would sort of speak through her and then the priest would interpret the messages. So you could say she was a vessel just sort of drugged out on the gas coming out the cracks and just sort of gibbering, and they would use her for propaganda. A man was speaking through her to men. But on the other hand, people from around the whole of the sort of civilized world would travel to Delphi to hear what she had to say. And we, her messages were actually incredibly powerful. If it wasn't Apollo speaking through it, if it was her deciding what to say, she was changing fates of whole countries and civilizations. So I'm really interested in that sort of, it's like with my dad, I don't know if he was really psychic or not. I feel the same with the Oracle of Delphi. I'm really interested in that sort of ambiguity.
Yeah, I think belief itself kind of changes perception, doesn't it? And I mean, there are famous examples of the Oracle kind of speaking in riddles. So somebody would go away going, brilliant, and they hadn't really interpreted the phrase exactly, and they would come to grief. So
it's like poetry. It's you can read it. Good poetry you can read more than one way, and they're very clever verbal constructions, really, aren't they? That you can she never gets it wrong, because you can always say, oh, you should have interpreted it another way. I should find some examples from the book, really, shouldn't I?
Well, there's the example where if this happens, a great civilization will be destroyed, and the person asking didn't realize it was their great civilization that was going to be destroyed. So,
that
I mean, that's one thing that kind of leapt out. So it was the god Apollo, very interesting figure. It made me think a little bit. Have you ever read the Magus?
Oh,
John Fowles.
21. It was a very long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, that plays with all the idea, the mystery and the sinisterness of the Greek myths. So maybe it's time to read that again. So pretty much, was it coronavirus that put paid to your original Delphi trip? Because you did get a grant to go there.
Yeah, I got some money off the Society of Authors to go there, actually, which thank you to them. And I'm finally going this summer, a bit late now. But yeah, it was going to be a sort of writing retreat, and I was going to soak it all in and see what spoke through me. But instead, the pandemic happened, and I was reading Jenny Field's The Weather, which is very sort of fragmented, and it's about living in this time of environmental apocalypse, and it's about a sort of ordinary middle-aged woman and all the news, sort of what it's like to live in this time of news, within these news cycles. And I was reading that, and I suddenly thought, oh my God, maybe I'm writing a novel after all, because I wanted to write about the pandemic, and I had all these fragments about oracles and prophecies, and that was when it sort of came together. I think the other thing that made it come together is I suddenly had the idea that in lockdown, everyone was living their own tiny tragedies. We had all sorts of friends having all sorts of problems, whether that was parents dying of COVID, or marriage breakdowns, or suicide attempts. Some of our friends with mental health issues. We had and you were seeing them on Zoom, and you couldn't reach them and couldn't help them, and you could see these like nightmare scenarios going on. And I had this idea that it was like lots of us were having our own sort of tiny tragedies in our own house, because tragedy is all about unity of place, and it's always got a small cast and a single space, sort of behind closed doors. You do your daily walk down the street, and everything seems so quiet and dead, but there were all these little tragedies and dramas going on. And I think once I had that idea that my book needed a tragic narrative, that's when I realized it was a novel, because my own life is not a tragedy. But I've always been fascinated by tragedies. Tragedy is something we should talk about, because that's what got me into the Greek myths. I did the tragedy paper for my English degree, which was at Cambridge. I went to Cambridge English literature, and it had such a huge impact on me. I absolutely loved that tragedy paper. And I think I'm drawn again and again to the tragic arc, the tragic narrative and storytelling, which is so rare in contemporary culture. There's so few modern tragedies at the moment. And that seems wild to me, because we live in, to me, an absolutely tragic time, which is, humanity is overreached, which is what you always get in tragedy, and is now in this moment of recognition, of realizing what we've done. So it seems to me humanity is on rather gloomily quite a tragic arc, but tragedy is something that I sort of, for me, sorry, my earbud. For me, the excitement of tragedy, the appeal of tragedy is not that everyone dies in the end. The appeal is, these are not my earbuds, by the way. These are my husband's I've borrowed, and they clearly don't fit my ears as well as his ears. Can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yeah.
For me, the appeal of tragedy is not all the corpses at the end, but this moment of recognition, this moment where the lead character realizes the consequences of their actions and what they've done. And I think that's a really interesting moment in narrative.
Famously, you're supposed to, as a viewer, you're supposed to feel catharsis, and that is the Greek word, isn't it? It's like a discharge of energy, psychic energy or something, at the end of a tragedy.
Yeah, which I do. I think I like to be absolutely rinsed out with tears at the end of a piece of art.
I like the aspect.
Hopefully my book makes people cry. It made me cry, so I was saying that's a good sign.
I've been rereading it, actually, from reading it when it first came out and rereading it now. And of course, it's now the record of an era that seems very strange. Like it's a little bubble in itself that I think we're still reminding ourselves sort of, oh yeah, we didn't go out for months. Oh yeah, we had to leave our shopping for 72 hours if you bothered to do that, of course.
Yeah.
You know, it although it's so recent, it feels really strange to read about. So were you writing it during the pandemic or after the pandemic, or were you kind of putting it together like bits of a mosaic?
Yeah, I wrote it actually quite quickly in 2 bursts during the pandemic. So I have 2 small children and I was homeschooling them, and I didn't write anything for the whole time they were off school. And then there was that autumn they went back for a bit. And that's when I sort of wrote the first draft in a month. And then it was the Christmas that was cancelled. And I was homeschooling again over the winter. And then when they went back after Easter, I did the second draft in a couple of weeks and sent it to my agent. So I wrote it very, very quickly, sort of in a fever, really. But as it was happening, and that changed the narrative, because the Christmas, when I finished my first draft, Christmas hadn't happened. That hadn't been cancelled, and that became part of the story as I was writing it. So it's a bit like, I was quite inspired by Ali Smith. You know, she does these sort of almost real-time novels. I like this idea of doing a sort of real-time.
Yeah, the seasonal novels where, I mean, sometimes you read those and you think, but Ali, that only happened last week. How have you managed to put it in a book? And I think Hamish Hamilton would just had the presses ready to rush into print. It's an amazing feat, really. But yeah, it's certainly interesting to read all this stuff now. Now, we should say that it is not the story of your lockdown. I mean, I feel there are moments where your frustration comes through in the lead character.
Yeah,
but it is not you.
Yeah, I think the lead character is quite like me, I have to say. I thought of her as a sort of avatar. Like my children lost themselves, spent a lot of time playing computer games during lockdown, as we all did, to escape. But an avatar is a sort of version of you, but they get to lead alternative lives, and then they die and you start again, as it were. Yeah. And I felt like she's my avatar. She is a version of me. She is a version of me. But me, if things had happened differently, if I'd done classics at university, for example, which I didn't do, she has done, and she's gone on to be a classicist and an academic. And if I'd married a different man, and if I'd had different children. For me, fiction was very liberating, though, because, like I said, originally I was thinking non-fiction. But I often feel a lot of memoir or auto-fiction, you think it's going to be really honest, but actually it pulls its punches, because people don't want to bring their children into it. And people don't want to talk intimately about their husbands. And, they're very sexless. A lot of this auto-fiction I find very sexless and things like that. And so I found fiction liberating, because it was like suddenly you can be more honest in a way about what it's like to be a middle-aged woman or whatever, because they're not real. It's not my husband, it's not my children.
Yeah.
So I was sort of and
I'm
also the
Jason
character
isn't
could be a
your
bit
husband.
more of a bitch. Because in real life I like everyone to like me, and I'm very woke and polite. But I could sort of let off the rein a bit and vent and go a bit crazy and say, be more of a bitch through this character, because she's not me. Having said that, I wanted it to have the texture of autofiction. I really like autofiction. I really like Rachel Cusk and stuff like this. I really like that feeling. It feels more real somehow in its digressions and its texture than, the conventional plotted novel. So I was trying to make it feel real. So if people think it is me, I've only myself to blame. I fooled my German translator, which I felt quite bad about because the character is a German translator in the book, and I don't speak a word of German. And I'm not a translator, I'm not a linguist. And my German translator was like, "Oh, I'm so happy to be working with you. Finally, someone can appreciate my translation." And then I felt a bit bad. I had to break it to her, but rather cunning that I got away with it.
I interviewed Pedro Almodovar once, and I said sort of "Buenos tardes," and he said in Spanish, and I knew enough that he was going, "Thank God, someone speaks Spanish. At last, I can speak Spanish in an interview." And I went, "That was it, you know." That's the limit. And he sighed and went back to English. So. Yeah, it becomes a little bit of a disappointment, doesn't it? So the novel has this sort of intriguing form that you've put in lots of fascinating detail about the ancient Greeks, and it's clearly a mode of thinking that does your protagonist have a name? I can't remember. Is she just a first person? Yeah,
she's just a first person.
So she sees the world with this sort of ancient Greek lens, if you like. So there's lots of material about different forms of divination. So in the ancient world, well, we've talked about the Sibyls, but I think people know about reading entrails, which sounds horrible, but that's something that used to happen. But you've really got some quite mad things. They've all got names: causimancy, prophecy by burning, oneromancy, prophecy by dreams. Well, that obviously exists. Did you make up anything?
No, I again, I'm not a classicist or an expert, and I was researching this during the pandemic. I basically just found a list on Google, on Wikipedia, of all the types of prophecy, and there were so many wild types. At first, I thought I was just going to have it as a chapter, as a sort of found poem, but I am a poet, and I do like structure, form, and I found it really useful once I'd had that idea to name each chapter after a different form of prophecy. Some are the ones where she's actually trying that form of prophecy because she's researching it, but some are more oblique or what I think is really interesting. You could call it prophecy by dizziness, prophecy by paper money, prophecy by wine, and so on. What I really like about having those chapter titles is I think it makes people read differently. As a poet, I'm used to the reader reading with a certain sort of attention, like an apple in a poem is never just an apple, it's a symbol of sin or something like that, and a road is never just a road, it's like the journey of life. You expect the reader in a poem to read with real attention, whereas in a novel, a road usually just is a road. And I always say you'd be very careful about putting a sausage in a poem. Whereas in a novel, a sausage is just a sausage, But what I quite liked is having those chapter titles, I think, makes people read the novel with a different sort of attention, actually. And makes people read the novel in the same way people obsessed with prophecy and prediction read the world. They wander around and they see signs everywhere. And poets see signs everywhere. And I think hopefully the reader will read this book in a slightly different way that I think is quite interesting. Writing a book about prophecy is really funny, isn't it? Because you can set up prophecies and then you can make them come true. And the reader might think that's because I believe prophecies come true. But really, I'm just a writer. I'm just a writer who can't resist, setting up a pattern and then sort of closing the form.
Does it say something about the character that she is so interested in looking for signs? Does it say something about the pandemic itself and what people were going through? Do you think people were more people were more inward thinking, weren't they? People tended to go into themselves a bit more, and there was a lot of introspection, I think, and maybe it's part of that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of focus on the small things, isn't there? Instagram's all full of pictures of, you know, a flower, a weed, or a nice cup of hot chocolate, because there was nothing else but these little things. You had to sort of focus down. There's no big vistas, you know, during the pandemic. But also, there was a wider point I wanted to make, which is the pandemic made profits of everyone. You know, we were all tuned into the, what was it called? The daily briefing or whatever every day.
Oh, yeah.
Where they would have all these charts where they would predict, if we didn't lock down for 2 weeks, how many people might die or whatever. But it was all just prediction. It's all just prediction. And everyone, and Boris Johnson genuinely said on the year anniversary of the pandemic, if only I could, my one wish is I knew now, if I'd known then what I knew now, was my one wish. He actually said that, you know. So they were all scrabbling around to predict what the future would hold, or to work out what was happening and failing. And also the internet, which the book's a lot about the internet, really. That's something I've been thinking about for a while before the pandemic. And I've been reading Shoshana Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which is an amazing book, thinking about that. And the internet is all about prediction. It's Google is a prediction machine, you know. All these big engines and servers, that's what they do, or Twitter or Facebook, all of it, that's what they do, is they cream data off you, scrape data off you, to then try and predict how you'll behave, and to prompt you into behaving in certain ways. And the more accurately they can predict how you'll behave when they prompt you, the more money they make. It's the prediction business. So I'm quite interested in how, you know, we think we're past that. We think we're past the age of oracles and prophecies, but actually, from Chris Whitty to, you know, the super forecasters, to Dominic Cumming to Google, it's all prediction business.
Yes, there's a bit where, because it's sort of happening as it happened, as it were, the characters watched Dominic Cumming do his... he was in a rose garden, wasn't it? Do his bizarre press conference. So Delphi allows us to sort of, you know, relive some very strange moments. I mean,
you're selling it, Suzi.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of books that have come out.
A lot of people don't want to, do they? Relive it.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what it is. The thing about this book, and certainly on rereading it, it's very dark in places, but it's also very funny. It has that kind of gloomy hilarity to it, which I really enjoyed.
Thank you.
And that seems to sort of fit the mood, doesn't it? The mood of the times. And, you know, where things are so dark in a way, you can't do anything but laugh. But are you quite pleased with that tone that you pulled off in Delphi?
Yeah, I think if you look at Goodreads or something, which I know I shouldn't, it seems like it's been quite a Marmitey book, you know. And I think it all depends on whether you get the humour or not, actually. The people who love it are the people who get it's funny, and the people who don't get the tone of the voice.
Yeah. Well, maybe.
Basically. But what can you do about that? I'm a tragicomic writer. That's always been my turn. So.
I mean, I always sort of associate it, you know, we're both from the Northwest. So, you know, I always felt Manchester was a bit like that. There was this sort of gloomy hilarity, which I always found very, very appealing, and also a kind of straight talking, tell it like it is, which again can be very funny. I don't know if that's a sort of generalization, but I certainly picked up on the dark humor, and just it's the other thing is this thing that you often get with female characters in novels, where people go, she isn't very likable. And I'd actually rather have, I saw something the other day that actually, like, I don't know if it's a trend yet, but spiky female characters are what we really want, I think.
I think she is quite likable, my character. They all say she's not
unlikable. She's not unlikable.
I don't think she's unlikable. She is quite spiky, but it's all in her head. Like, if you see what she does in real life, she's a really good woman, you know. She's a good colleague. She's actually quite a patient wife. She's doing her best for her son. She's had a lot of hardship in her life. But just the fact she has some spiky thoughts in her head, people don't like her. I find that wild. It's like, anyone who says that, you've got to think. Luke Kennard did a good tweet. I can't say it exactly, but it's like, it's wild these people think that, you know, if we went in their heads and saw their every thought, we would like them.
Yeah.
You know? Who doesn't have dark thoughts occasionally? Who doesn't have unpleasant or bitter thoughts occasionally?
Yeah. I suppose it's still seen as a bit transgressive. I mean, she has this underlying hostility, or maybe overlying hostility, to Jason, a very meaningfully named husband. And actually the kids, there's a bit of, oh God, I'm bored of hanging out with this kid all day.
Yeah, but most mothers think that in their heads, you know.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I think goodness is based on what you, and likability should be based on what you do, not what you think. I think there's an important line to be drawn that, you know, as long as, like, there's a really interesting point where she wears a mask and she says you should wear a mask, and she does wear a mask. But she thinks in her head, I don't actually like wearing masks very much. They make me uncomfortable and claustrophobic and deaf, you know, which I think a lot of people felt. But a lot of people picked up on that on the reviews and said, oh, you know, I can't believe she said that. And it's, you know, I wouldn't want, it's very ableist and all this. But like, you're not allowed to even think thoughts like that in your head. Or is art not allowed to register that people have thoughts like that? Like, it doesn't make her a bad person because she's wearing the mask. I think the important thing is what you do, right? But you're allowed to have. Anyway, I just thought that was a really interesting. I think that's maybe a generational thing.
Yeah.
But there seems like a younger generation of literary critics online who think characters aren't even allowed to think thoughts that are out of line with the current.
Yeah, that's pretty terrifying. There's another little kind of vignette in the book about, so the unknown narrator is a teacher and a lecturer, which I have been also. And there's a reference to trigger warnings on Ovid. And we will come to Ovid when we talk about this book. But that's very interesting. I mean, the character is basically pro, but I've been reading another book called The Expectation Effect, and it kind of struck me that if you sort of say in advance, trigger warning, you might get triggered, then that might actually exacerbate feelings or even bring them about when they wouldn't have been triggered otherwise. So what, like I say, your character is reasonably pro and thinks, yeah, fine, why not? Because Ovid is a bit rapey, quote from the book. But what's your view on that?
I think it's better than cancelling and banning books. You know, I think trigger warning can be a middle ground, can't it? Right. Saying we're still going to teach this. We think it's important, but it doesn't really do that much harm to just say a line at the beginning if you think it's going to react to you. If you think it's going to make you react or it's going to upset you, you can step out at that time or whatever, or don't read this book. I sort of think that's okay.
It's okay. Yeah,
I mean, it's quite considerate. It's quite low impact. It doesn't make that much difference. I think it is much better than the opposite, which would be saying we can't teach these people anymore. You know, we can't look at Gauguin anymore, and we can't teach Ovid. Because they had wrong or bad thoughts. I think it's easier, or we can't teach this poem because it uses the N word or whatever. I think it's better just to say at the beginning, just so you know, it's going to do this. Yeah.
I mean, of course, Sylvia Plath's wonderful poem Ariel
Yeah.
Has the ending.
And I taught that last week. I did a reader's day on Ariel, the book for Faber last week, which was really, she's one of my all-time favorite poets, obviously. And but I just said, you know, there's a word, the N word is used in this poem, just so you know. I'm not going to read it out loud because I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to do so as a white. But there on the page, and everyone was fine with that. I don't think that's.
Did it give rise to an interesting discussion about why the word is there?
Well, yeah. I mean, we broadened it out to more generally. There's a lot of things in. There's a lot of things in Plath, aren't there, that are contentious now, such as I may be a Daddy. Jew and Hiroshima and so on. So we had quite an interesting discussion about that. I mean, I'm sympathetic to those references because I think she wrote very much out of her time. That's forgotten about. We think it's very personal. It's very diary-ish. But she was like 13 when Hiroshima happened and when the photos started coming out of Auschwitz and stuff. And she's half German and half American. That would have made a huge impact, had a huge impact on her. And I think it's to her credit that she isn't just writing about herself, you know, and that she's aware, I think, of the world and the terrible things happening in the world. And that is always bearing its pressure on these domestic scenes. Sorry, I'm just going through a defensive laugh there, but you know, I similarly write confessional poetry of my time, which mentions the climate crisis and but all these other pressures are always bearing down on the domestic poetry. Personal and political always overlap, you know, in my work, and I think that's what Plath's doing too. Obviously, her awareness of Black civil rights, I'm not sure. Yeah, there's an argument the poem The Swarm is about slavery, actually.
Right,
which I find quite compelling.
Yes, the bees are kind of trapped in a box, aren't they? And they're kind of... Again, it's going back to what you said, you know, a road is never just a road and a box is never just a box in poetry. Yeah, there's a swarming of hands, isn't there, in that?
Yeah, I think she's certainly aware of these terrible things happening in the world. You know, it's always of evil. She's aware of evil.
But I suppose the thing about tragedy, as we were talking about earlier on, is that I guess the point about it, whether you need a trigger warning or not, is that it is somehow it somehow helps you process difficult thoughts. It is meant to raise difficult thoughts, put it that way. It hasn't done its job if you come out of a tragedy and go, "Oh, that was nice," you know. You know, it's meant to stir something up, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the ending of my book's quite harrowing. Maybe my book needs a trigger warning. But it doesn't have one.
No. So I think the experience with Delphi was different for you than with your experience of getting your poetry published, because you wrote quite a few novels before Delphi that remain unpublished. And do you think this is different because of the structure that you managed to find, or the time, or what was it, do you think? And what do you think about your unpublished novels now?
There was one unpublished novel. I think I was very unlucky. It was really good. But the others I can look back and see I was too young. The others I wrote in my 20s, and I think in a way 20s is too young to write a novel, unless it's literally just a novel about being young and in the 20s, made to appeal to 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
But I don't think I had the life experience to write a fuller, richer, deeper novel. You know, you need to have done things like, I don't know, been in a hospital, been in a police station, someone you know's died, all these things, you know, changed a nappy. all these things that I wrote novels in my early 20s. I was making this stuff up, but I hadn't done any of those things, just basic life experience. And when you live these things, they're never the same as you clumsily imagined they were. I think it's
so. What has being a poet been like all these years? I mean, you studied English at Cambridge. Various collections have come out, but you can't really earn a living as a poet. Did you go into teaching at all?
Yeah, I've been. I like to describe myself as a sort of lady of letters, really. There's no genre of writing I'm not interested in. I just love words. I love it all, and I've done all sorts. I've written for radio. I've written. I had a play on at the Royal Court, the first play in the UK about climate change. I like to boast about that, although it's not really a boast. Nobody fucking listened, did they? Art makes nothing happen, etc. I've always been trying to write children's novels as well. I'm really interested in children's novels as a genre. And I wrote a non-fiction book, of course, which was the history of children's picture books.
Right, okay, yeah. Let's have a look at that. So it's just picture books. What was that having a kid? Did that sort of inspire that in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's my first prose book, so I was really excited to get that published. It's sort of a history of children's picture books, going from Edward Lear and Beatrix Potter through Good Night Moon, Miffy, Where the Wild Things Are, Shirley Hughes, Judith Kerr, all the way up to The Gruff Boy and Stickman. I am with Stickman, which always makes me cry. But it's also sort of my autobiography. I like to say up to the age of 5, volume 1. So it's quite sort of about being brought up in this little village near Bolton, and my dad, who was a real character, he was the deputy head of the local school, and it's sort of about my relationship with him.
It could be a sort of first in a trilogy. You could do the mid-range years and then the YA years, and also bring in your own life. Did you? I mean, moving on to mid-range. Do you ever remember learning to read as such? I don't think I do.
It would have been at nursery. I remember going up for reading lessons, like Cat on the Map, but really young. But I can mainly remember. I was always allowed to go to the big kids library when I was an infant, and then by the time I was a junior, I was reading Jane Eyre when I was about. I think when I was about 10, my dad started giving me books like Room at the Top and kind of loving all his favourite books. He loved all that working class man stuff. And my mum was always like, I think she's a bit young. Fine.
Yeah. I remember, I think I read The L-Shaped Room. I mean, there's something very thrilling. Like when you're an adult, you can read absolutely anything. But there's something very thrilling when you're young reading something that's a bit too advanced for you. And I think The L-Shaped Room, isn't that about pregnancy or something?
It is.
Unmarried pregnancy, and you're sort of reading that.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely thrilling stuff, you know.
So I never really read any what you'd call YA, because by the time I was at high school, I was reading every single Agatha Christie. I read every single one.
Yeah, that was a good gateway, actually. I remember starting on Agatha Christie's when I was about 11, because they're very ingenious, but they're simple. There's nothing in the writing that is difficult at all.
Exactly.
I don't think.
And they're not too sexy or adult or anything, really.
And they're not too long. And but I mean, YA as such didn't really exist. I'm sort of thinking about, you know, for me, YA would be something like Wuthering Heights that you sort of have to read if you live anywhere near the moors. The Bell Jar, those would, you know, To Kill a Mockingbird. Those would be. That's why YA is such a sort of strange genre, really, isn't it? So it didn't really didn't really exist, did it? And then you were, then it was Next Stop Ulysses.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Who are you reading as a poet? Who were your influences? I mean, was it Plath really early on?
Yeah, I mean, my first book, The Heavy Petting Zoo, is basically what if Sylvia Plath was in Ritzy and Bolton. It's basically I mean, that was probably the only poet I'd read in any depth, really. Then I got into the other confessional. I really loved Dan Sexton. I did my MA on Sexton.
Right, yeah.
And then at university, I guess I discovered I like Yeats and Auden both a lot. I'm interested in political poetry. Yeats, particularly his ballads and stuff, probably had a huge impact on me in the use of mythology. And Frank O'Hara, I love Frank O'Hara, which was a completely just different sound, different.
Yeah. He died in a beach buggy incident, didn't he, on Fire Island?
Yeah, when he was 40. That's right.
Yeah.
He's amazing.
Yeah, I should read more of his. I liked Wilfred Owen because I liked his sort of, they're really structural, aren't they, Wilfred Owen's poems?
Yeah,
but I also like his inventive rhymes. That seemed a really interesting way. You read things really early on, and then you read things and then you come back to them because they make more sense later. So William Blake we had to read at school, and I don't know, I don't think the teaching was very good.
No.
I just couldn't see the point of William Blake, and then much later you sort of think, oh, he's unbelievably amazing.
Yeah, I did The Wasteland when I was doing my A-levels, and I wrote a parody of it straight away. I remember just taking the piss out of it, thinking it was so willfully obscure,
I asked ChatGPT
to
write. I asked ChatGPT to write a poem in the style of T.S. Eliot because I thought, well, that'd be easy. You just get loads of quotes, but and that's what it does. Yeah. But it wasn't able to perform.
Fragments together. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't able to shore any fragments together in any. It was a bit dum 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 dum. Oh no. So
it was trying to pin down features of his voice, I suppose, and it couldn't because he uses so many voices.
I think it just, I mean, this is a while ago, so it's probably better now, but I think it just went, poetry goes da-dum, 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 and it rhymes A-B, A-B. That's where it was a bit ago. It was like mid-range. It was ChatGPT mid-range. Maybe it's got to YA now and got a bit more sophisticated, but I mean, when you were talking about Googling the list of strange prophetic technologies, I mean, you could just get ChatGPT to do that now, presumably. Yeah, I mean, I'm meeting people all the time who go, oh yeah, I use it a lot and it's really helpful, and I don't really understand, I must say.
Well, if you're in some kind of line of work where you're churning out copy, I suppose.
Yeah,
but it's never going to be able to do literature. That's a different thing.
Yeah, that's what I hope. Anyway, that's what I hope.
I think the pinnacle it will be able to achieve is Mills and Boon novels. That's my prediction.
Right. Yeah. Things that
they're
are very
so formulaic.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. Well, I know you've. Did you edit poetry in translation or something like that?
Yes, I did. I was the editor of Modern Poetry in Translation for 5 years.
And how did that come about?
I just always wanted to edit a poetry magazine, and there's not many paid posts about. I love editing. I love that sort of. I love curating. I love talent spotting. I love that excitement of. I used to love Press Gang. I don't know if you remember. There's a TV show, Press Gang, when I was a teenager, about pulling a newspaper together, and the editor was Julia Swahala.
Right. Yeah.
And I was editor of the school magazine, so I love that sort of the deadline and all the team effort of pulling a magazine together. I felt slightly a bit of a cheat because I'm not really a translator or a linguist, but every magazine would feature a different language, so as editor you couldn't know all the languages anyway. Yeah that's always what I told myself. And it was co-set up by Ted Hughes, who was passionate about international poetry like I am, but wasn't a translator either, wasn't a linguist. So So that was
Yeah.
my interview. Well, like Ted Hughes, I don't. But you know, I'm sort of glad to have stepped down now, because I felt like a lot of the time I was expected to be sort of Mrs. Translation and go and do talks on translation and workshops on translation, and I always felt slightly like it's not really me. But I had a great time, especially early on before the pandemic. It was great fun because I was lots of opportunities for travel and meeting poets from all around the world. And you know,
is there a particular language that we should? Is there a particularly rich poetic tradition and language that we should all go and investigate?
Yeah,
or is it just rich all over the world?
Yeah, some of my favourite issues. I did a Somali issue, which I was very proud of. I've worked on co-translations before of a Somali poet, Aishalul Muhammad Yusuf, and it's an amazing poetic tradition, absolutely amazing. It's sort of structured around alliteration, and the lines along with the caesura in the middle, often in the gabe form. So it's a bit like Sagawan in the Green Knight or something, but it's still alive, this tradition now, and it's an oral tradition. It's really rich. I love Somali poetry. Also, Hungarian poetry is great, and I've co-translated Anna Sava. She's a good friend of mine. They're mad for poetry over there. Really rich poetic culture. And I love the Mexico issue. Mexicans are just complete dudes, basically. That was the coolest issue.
Yeah. So you're we'll go on to this now, which is your version of Ovid. I mean, everybody knows about the Metamorphoses, but this I was not familiar with this book of Ovid's before. But tell me how this came about, basically. So this is you've translated it as Ovid's Heroines, Blood Axe paperback, and how did that come about?
Somebody just said, "Oh, have you read Ovid's Heroides?" And I said, "Oh, no, I haven't." "Oh, you might like it." It was my friend Matthew Hollis, actually, who's been poetry editor of Faber until recently. And we were on a British Council tour. We were actually in Greece, so that's why we were chatting about classics and everything. And I sort of half listened, and 6 months later, I saw it in the library and got it out. And then I realised what it was, and I was of the generation of poets where Caroline Duffy's The World's Wife was the book. It was massive. Like I saw her do it at the Bolton Octagon, big performance. The place was absolutely packed. It was the most successful poetry book when I was a teenager by miles. Everyone knew it. And I couldn't believe she hadn't credited Ovid for stealing his idea. That this was a book where the women of Greek and Roman myth, which I absolutely adore, tell their side of the story. And it you know, a guy's writing it BC. And it's the first book of dramatic monologues. It's called the first book of epistolary fiction because it's all in letter form. Also, it had the tragic heroines in it, and tragedy, as I said, was sort of my big entry point. Medea's in there, Phaedra. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, really. And then I spent about a year thinking, oh, you know, someone should translate that, but not me. I don't have Latin, but it would be nice if a woman translated it, and it would be nice if it was, you know, it's so dramatic, if it was performable and all this. And then eventually I just thought, you know, I'm gonna have a go. So I started with Phaedra, and I performed it at a salon. A poet called Wayne's Holloway Smith was doing this cool little salon, and another poet called Julia Bird, who does live literature, saw it and said we should do a show. So that was cool. So the two things sort of came together. It's the monologues are very dramatic, and I did it as a one-woman show. And I have to say, it's one of the highlights of my literary career was being Medea. I always wanted to do it. And I actually did it when I was heavily pregnant. By the time the second run of the show came through, and I was sort of tearing down the curtains, and I had to knock everything off the table, and there was a quite nervous point where I had to get down on my knees and then stand up again, which when I was heavily pregnant was a bit tricky. But yeah, pregnant Medea, I think it's pretty iconic. I'm quite proud of myself.
So did you memorize the monologues to do that?
Yeah, quite a few of them. But we had this really papery set because it's all in letters, so the letters all scattered around and on the tables and stuff. So it was quite cunning that they were there as props. If I needed them, I could just
grab,
pick up a letter. Worked quite well. Yeah. Thanks for that, Julia. Yeah.
So is it a selection from Ovid's, or is it the whole book in the order that he presented it?
It's the whole book in the order he presented it, of what's called the single Heroides. There are some later ones called the double Heroides where the men reply, but I didn't get involved in that. I just kept it to them. Felt like the right length of the books.
And had they been translated much before, or was it that sort of word by word, very unpoetic kind of literal translation you were working from?
There were, all the translations were quite old, dusty. They're all by men. And a lot of the introductions said, this isn't very good. One of Ovid's minor works. Or it was like they just hadn't got it or hadn't. Mine's, as far as I know, the first sort of free verse. Well, there's a prose translation in Lower, the very old one. But mine was the first free verse translation. I sort of copied Hughes in doing free verse, and I thought that because I wanted it to be dramatic, that gave me so much more possibility of changing the pacing and the rhythm and things like that. Rather than, there's always a temptation with Ovid because he writes in couplets for these translators to translate it into couplets that are very tum-ty-tum and make it all sound very samey. And also the translators often aren't poets, so they're all full of clangingly bad rhymes and things. So so it made it much more, free verse is a much more flexible medium to translate into.
I mean, I
think this is responsible for the whole, these infinite classics books, novels that keep coming out in the voices of women from Greek and Roman myth. There's thousands of them. It's like I was saying, it's like a magic porridge pot they can't turn off, and this came out just before all those. I mean, I'm not taking full credit. I'll say Ovid can take the credit, but I definitely think this was a very little known text when my translation came out, and now I feel like it's almost triggered. Now it's not. It's taught on a lot of university courses and stuff now, and a lot of people are interested in this and doing PhDs on this and so on. And I know Natalie Haynes, because I did an event with her early on. So
she's got a quote on the back.
Oh yeah, she has. There you are. She reviewed it as well.
Yeah.
So I think. So I think I might have triggered this whole. Failed to make any money out of it. Everybody else is millionaires off the back of it. But I think I, triggered it by translating this book.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, if as you say, if you have a strict rhyme scheme, I mean, Ovid didn't rhyme as such, did he? Is it? No. I mean, I'm not very good on the technicalities of Latin poetry.
But
it's the length and the shape of the line in a way.
Yeah, these couplets, but often then the feeling is the English equivalent is some sort of 18th century rhyming couplet, or
like Alexander Pope or Dryden or something that. Yeah. And the only trouble with that is if you read, I've done some reading back and forth in, say, French poetry, and if you understand enough French, you can see how they've added words and put ideas in that are not there in order to get the rhyme or to fill out a line or something. So in a way, I'd much rather have a prose translation or free verse, as you say.
Yeah, I think there's not enough free verse translations. I think people think it's either, formal or prose, but actually free verse is a good in between. That's why Hughes's Ovid translation is so good.
Whose is huge, So Tales from Ovid, was that a bit of an inspiration as well?
Yeah, totally. And he almost always translates into free verse Hughes, thinking the meaning is more important than carrying the form over. He makes a very good argument for it,
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that it shouldn't sound archaic just because it's archaic to us, because
Yes.
when Ovid was writing, it was the freshest thing imaginable. I mean, it must have been amazing when he was writing these. I mean, we've heard, obviously, you know, Metamorphoses and Fasti, and there's the exile letters.
Yeah.
Can't remember what they're called, but so this is something that's almost
The Art of Love as well.
The Art of Love, yeah. I mean, there's great translations by Christopher Marlowe. Very sexy stuff. But yeah, maybe this has been sort of purposely forgotten until you brought it back. Do you have a favourite monologue apart from Medea?
Well, I really like doing Phaedra. I'm just invested in that. But Penelope's great as well, I think.
Yeah.
You know, you've got Margaret Atwood doing the retelling of Penelope.
The Penelope ad, yeah.
Wasn't it? But you know, I think she's the most likable of the voices. Yeah, what empathy? Again, you can accuse Ovid of he is a man of his time. You can't exactly call him a feminist, but what an incredible thing to decide to do a whole book in the voices of women, and they're complicated, intelligent women, and you know, that with, you know, deep feelings, and the hearers, the men come out so badly. And you know, Penelope, I think, has just got this really lovely, wise, warm voice. You know, you can really feel the sort of her affection for her husband, you know, for Ulysses.
I mean, it is super modern in tone, and I wondered, almost to the point of being slangy at some points. And did you get any kind of pushback from classicists at all, or was it
surprisingly little, actually?
Right.
The classicists have been really nice to me, I have to say. It's a really nice world, the classics world. I thought I was a bit nervous, you know, blundering in, but they've been very nice to me, so I can't complain. Did
you learn any Latin along the way?
I tried to. I did an idler Latin for beginners course.
Oh, right, yeah.
I had the dictionary by me, so I did actually, when like the prose translation, the Loeb, and another old translation I had were not agreeing, or I thought it didn't sound very good, I would look at the originals or pick through it word by word. But
the Idler, I think you're the poetry editor.
I am. It's not much. It's not a paid role. I just chuck a poem their way every issue. That's all. But yeah, I have a long time association with them though. So I used to be managing editor, which was a hard job. I used to post out the whole mail out, lug it down to the post office.
Wow. I imagine keeping Tom Hodgkinson in check is quite a job.
It was deciding which red tipped bills to pay first, was usually the first thing I had to decide when I got into the office.
Yeah. So how did that job come about? Had you known Tom for a while?
No, I mean, he's public school set, not my background. But I volunteered for the Clerkenwell Literary Festival, which his partner Victoria was running. Right. And that's how I got to know the Idler crew. It was a really exciting time though, because it was I guess early noughties. Around Clerkenwell there was this massive venue which was sort of semi-illegal called the TARDIS, where they used to run the festival. And they used to have these wild parties there, and all sorts of people would show up. Damien Hirst and Louis Theroux and all this. So I was in my early 20s, and suddenly I got access to this quite glamorous world. You know. It was fun.
Yeah. They just had the Idler Festival, which again was really fantastic fun. Just that mix of loafing around and reading, and I bumped into somebody who I didn't know them, but I saw them at the festival. And I asked them what events they'd been to. And they said, I just sort of sat about outside on the grass. So it's quite a funny festival in that people will happily pay for 2 days and then just maybe get a cider and sit under a tree. You know, it kind of makes perfect sense, really. with an Idler festival. But anyway, what is your next project? Do you have another novel or
Yes,
a string
I've
of
got two other
right.
novels, Suzi. It's very exciting.
Fantastic. Wow. So what stage are they at?
So they're both coming out in spring. So I've got a kids novel, which finally achieved my dream of getting a children's novel coming out, just with a small press called Emma Press. But they make really beautiful books, and it's going to be illustrated, which is really lovely. They're already sending me images. It's called The Untamables. And it's, I love myth and legend. So this one's drawing on Arthurian myth. And basically the setup is it's set in Camelot, but the Knights of the Round Table are the bad guys. They're basically like a Bullingdon club of colonialist, misogynist bullies. And a little boy who looks after the dogs in the castle, whose mum's a maid there, and his friend Elva, who's a disabled girl. Here, the knights are going on a search for the Holy Grail, and the little boy's mum's ill, and they decide they need to get this Grail before the knights do. So they set off on the quest. I'm really proud of it. I think it's a really banging tale, proper quest tale, and it's got it draws on Gawain and the Green Knight and the Lady of Shalott, and the Lady in the Lakes there, fairy lore, all this sort of stuff.
Sword in the Stone.
That's just a gimmick to try and make Arthur look like the righteous king.
Right.
Just one of Merlin's bits of propaganda.
Right. Okay. Pretty delightful novel, though. And the other one presumably is for grown-ups.
Yeah, a grown-up novel coming out with, it's not been announced yet, but it's my same publishers as Delphi in the UK and the US.
Fig Tree, I think.
Fig Tree and Avid Reader in the US. And it's called The Modern Fairies. And this one is set at the time of Louis XIV, and it's set in the salons where they told fairy tales. So where Charles
Perrault and
yeah. So the versions we know of sort of Cinderella, Rapunzel, early version of Rapunzel, early versions of Rumpelstiltskin, and Bluebeards and stuff all came out of these salons. And the stories are just amazing. When I started researching it, it was another of those. It was like coming across Ovid's heroines. It was like, I can't believe no one's written this novel. Maybe I can write this novel. I've not written a proper historical novel before, so that was a bit intimidating at first, but I'm really excited. The stories are just amazing. Like one woman in the salon gets married to this guy, and the family decides she's not an appropriate match, so they take him to their castle, basically lock him up in their castle till the marriage is annulled. And she breaks in with a traveling circus disguised as a bear.
And that's an original, 18th century or 17th century story? What are those dates?
It's like 1680s.
Right. Yeah, 17th century.
So it's like over 100 years before the Grimm brothers, these people were. And actually, the Grimms get a lot of attention, but in their first book, half the stories were just Charles Perrault's stories. Printing.
And weren't they?
These were the first people to really collect and adapt and make fairy tales into literary fairy tales.
Yeah, I think they were meant to be for adults, weren't they? They were meant to amuse adults rather than. They're quite sophisticated.
Yes, the salons were very adult. Yeah. Yes, and so stories you think like Red Riding Hood, Perrault tacks on a little moral at the end that it's about not trusting wolfish men. So they're actually got quite adult little morals. Yeah.
Cool.
Bluebeards, so that's not really for children, is
it? So those are both written, done, coming out next spring.
I'm on edits.
Editing. Brilliant. No, those sound great. I can't wait to read the fairy stories for sure. Okay, right. Let's wind up. I will ask my 3 questions. So my first question Favourite artwork? What have you got?
I found this really hard, Suzi, because I love art. I go and see art exhibitions all the time. And you can see my copy of Ovid's Heroines. It's one of my favourite artists. That's Lee Miller.
Yeah, it's
There's The Blood of a Poet, taken
Man
by
Ray. Yeah.
And my last poetry book, Incarnation, has a Louise Bourgeois on the cover. It's one of my favourites. I've got a hanky by her on my wall, which is my favourite piece of art I own, which says, "I have been to hell and back, and let me tell you, it was wonderful." But I really like Diane Arbus as well. I really have a thing for female photographers. I think there's something about photography that trying to capture the moment that's like poetry, I suppose, in some ways. That impulse and making life out of art and art out of life, and the blurring those boundaries. And the female gaze, I'm really interested in. I once made a radio show called My Male Muse, which is all about the female gaze.
Oh yes, yeah.
So I do really like female photographers. So I think I'm going to go for Nan Goldin's The Ballad of Sexual Dependency, which is a slideshow of her photos, which is so iconic and amazing. Of that sort of early 80s sort of subculture. Her friends were, a lot of them were queer or within or taking heroin, and there's those brutally honest pictures of herself when she got beaten up, which was so powerful. But I think it's again that linking of the personal and political. She's a real inspiration. I recently watched her documentary, The Beauty and the Bloodshed, it was called, about her fight against the Sacklers with the opioid crisis. I think she's absolutely heroine. And I think that I first saw that piece of art when I was very young, and I think it had a profound effect on me as an artist. And it's something I've come back to again and again. So I'm going to go for that one.
Great choice. Now, a book that you perhaps should have read but haven't read and feel guilty about?
Doesn't really exist for me. I've read everything. But I've read a lot. I used to. I'm a bit obsessive, and I used to print out those sort of lists of 1,000 books to read before you die, and sort of tick them off. For me, it's more the problem for me is I like shorter books, as my novel attests, and I'm allergic to really, really thick books, and so more for me, the ones I feel guilty about, the ones I've started and then DNF'd. I started David Foster Wallace, Infinite Jest, but I only got about a quarter in. I started Don Quixote, but when I started that, I was like, wow, it sounds so fresh and it's amazing, it's funny. But I only got about a fifth of the way in, and then I started. So the trouble is with those, I'm never going to read them. If I couldn't. I've taken a run at them. I've taken a run at them. I feel like, I don't feel too guilty. But that's my weakness. Otherwise, I could say I've read most things. I did finish War and Peace, but I have to say the ending was a disappointment. So I think it was worth it.
I think it's quite funny imagining what a publisher today would say, sort of, Leo, it just doesn't work, I mean, in a way, he's done a little bit what you did in Delphi. There are, the Delphi is much more manageable. That there's a load of material that doesn't seem to fit with the fiction. But he's just got to get it in. He's got to get all the Napoleon stuff in and all this theorising about war. How are you with Dickens? I mean,
I've read most of Dickens. I read one every Christmas. I've read all of Shakespeare. I've read the King James Bible and the Quran, both end to end. I've read all of the Mr. Men books in order.
Wow.
Picture book thing. I'm quite thorough when I start.
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty good going. I think we can let you off Infinite Jest. And finally, if you ever had any bizarre or funny or weird feedback about any aspect of your work.
Yeah, I should have got it.
You did say you went on. You said you went on Goodreads, which is not really.
I did, and there was a really funny one the other day, which went of Delphi. And it was something like, I can't believe she spent a whole page talking about her period blood, and then there was a bit about swans' penises. Too weird for me. One star. I was really proud of my swan penis line, so you know.
Yeah, it's very
I
good.
said I was a bit marmitey, Susie, but there you are.
It's very good. Yes, I can't think of another book in which a swan is it a corkscrew penis?
Yeah, they have a corkscrew penis. Yeah.
Read Delphi if you want to know what that's all about. Okay, yeah. Any other weird feedback, or is that your favourite for the moment?
Yeah, no,
that'll do. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining me in the book bag. I'm really looking forward, certainly, to the fairy tale novel. I'll definitely check that out from Fig Tree. But all it remains for me to say is thank you very much for coming along and talking about these two books in a very varied oeuvre that you have, and Bolton forever. What else can I say? Thank you very much for joining me.
A pleasure. Always nice to chat.
It's always good to chat. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. And thank you for watching. That's been really good fun. Join me next time for another fascinating author. Can't promise swans' penises. I think that's just going to be a one-off for today. But join me next time. Please like and subscribe. Tell your friends, and I'll see you soon. Thanks. And I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.